I completely agree with you. There were certain people that said to me, you need X amount of years experience to get in a managerial role or become a consultant. And I think it's absolute rubbish. So my biggest advice that I give to people is...
Hi, Karandeep. Thanks for joining. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. So one thing that really struck out, when I was looking at your background, researching for the show is your background in the Royal Air Force. So can you give me some context of what that time period in your life was like, and how did you transition from that into life sciences and the MedTech industry?
Yeah, sure. So I've always had a strong military background when it comes to my family. My grandfather fought in the British Indian Army, hence why I now live in the UK. He fought there in the 60s during World War II. But the program that is in my school, we have what was known as a combined cadet force, which was around the age of 13 to 14 in our school. We had the choice where we recreationally after school on a Friday evening, we could either join the army or we could join the Royal Air Force. I decided to join the Royal Air Force because I had a bit of a fascination with flying. And that's basically what happened. So I was in school and I had the option to join the Royal Air Force. But around the time where I finished college, I decided to go on to university. And it's probably one of the biggest regrets of my life where I had the option to do my gliding scholarship. But as you know, when you're a teenager, you don't think straight, do you? It's one of them months.
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing when I was a teenager, but it was definitely not something as courageous or respectful as going to the Air Force. So that's really great. So from your time there, when you went into the industry, whatever time you spent, I think it was like 4 years, something that you spent there. Are there any habits today that you developed in that time span that you carry along when you work or when you work with clients or do business?
Yes, and I think a lot of young people are missing this today. We're living in a generation whereby things are only a few clicks away. If you want the answers to something, it only takes a few minutes. If you go back to the old days, you would have had to go to a library or study something for many years. And we've gone to this generation right now, we can get answers within seconds or even minutes. With me, I've always learned to see that long-term vision. What do you want to be 1 year from now or 3 years from now or 4 years from now? And stop seeking the immediate results. And that's what I've learned to have. And I learned that very early on with my career, was that you've got to suffer a first few years to get to where you want to be. And I feel as though the modern generation is missing that.
Great point. Yeah. Everyone wants instant gratification. Totally agree with that. You've been in the medtech space since you started your career, more than a decade. I don't know the exact number of years. What have you seen in the medtech industry from when you started earlier in your career and from where it is today? Can you give us a contrast of what you've seen changed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the EU MDR is the elephant in the room. Let's face it. Yeah. Anyone who talks about the medical device industry is the EU MDR. But personally, I'm an advocate of the EU MDR. There needed to be a change. And a lot of companies out there, we had a lot of warning. The EU MDR started surfacing around 2017. And if companies aren't ready for it, that's their fault. The EU MDR did not come overnight, and it was a much needed change. Because unfortunately, there was a lot of companies out there that didn't have proper technical files, that weren't doing proper risk management, etc., which meant that there was a lot of devices out there on the market that were unsafe. And I really think the EU MDR has helped get rid of those companies that weren't doing things properly. So yeah, I'm going to be an advocate here. A lot of people would disagree with me, but I think the EU MDR was a much needed change.
So I caught on to the point that you made, which is very interesting. Companies not being ready when they already know that there's a change coming in the landscape. So from your perspective as a consultant and an industry veteran, what do you think companies can do to be prepared for any regulatory, business, or technical changes that are coming either in their company or in the industry as general?
A lot of companies, first of all, need to work out what is your product. So every time I take on a new client, I will say, what is your intended use statement? What do I mean by that? Who is your intended patient population? What are your intended claims? What markets do you want to attack? Is it the UK, the EU, the USA, etc.? And number 4, of course, is what clinical data do you have? And a lot of companies don't realize that. That's the mistake that I've seen with companies, that they actually don't know what their product is. And then you can work backwards from that. So first of all, work out what is your product, what claims do you want to make, and what markets do you want to go towards. And it's surprising how many companies I speak to that don't know the answer to these questions.
So if you went to a client and you saw that they weren't prepared or they didn't have that maturity, what is something that you would recommend they do to get to that stage?
Go out and find a similar device out there on the market and see what claims they're making. Then that will give you a rough idea in terms of what claims can get you onto the market. And especially if you're going to the US, because in the US, you've got two different routes. You've got the 510K and you've got the de novo. The 510K route means that you've got substantial equivalence to something that's already on the market. So there's already a device out there that's got similar claims to you. That means that you can use them as a predicate device, as in to say to the FDA, look, there's already a device out there in the market that's got similar claims, and we're claiming something similar. Now, the other route with the FDA is de novo, which means that there's nothing similar out there on the market. So go and do some research and see if there's something similar already out there in terms of what you want to claim, and you work backwards from there.
Totally agree on that. Any interesting projects that you worked on recently with any clients? Obviously, I know you can't share confidential details, but anything that jumps out as your favorite project in the last 3 or 5 years?
Yes, quite recently I've been working on what's known as a combination product. So that's both a drug device combination, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Now, my university background was within pharmaceuticals, but I've never worked in pharmaceuticals to this day. It just so happened that the first job I had at university was medical devices, and that's the area that I went into. So it was very interesting for me to go back to my early student career and see what pharmaceutical devices are like. And a combination device is a very strange one because you've got the pharmaceutical side and you've got the medical device side. So I'm working on the medical device side and they have a pharmaceutical expert there. And it's very interesting to see how these two industries can integrate with each other. There's a lot of similarities between both of them.
I haven't personally worked much with any medical device companies. I have some exposure working with companies that had products, but I've been mostly in pharma and biotech. But yeah, there is a lot of similarities in all of the life science verticals. So looking at your content on LinkedIn, right? We'll get onto that more as we go into the show. But the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you love about, because I know that you love what you do. It's very evident from the stuff you share or any videos or content that you create. But what I want to ask you is, what are some of those things? Like, why do you love to be in the MedTech industry or life sciences industry?
For me, it's a case of I directly get to see the impact I have on people's lives. It's not one of those jobs where I just get to see in the background. I agree with the quality and regulatory. Usually I am buried in paperwork and it may seem quite boring working in this industry, but for me, the enjoyment comes down to the moment that that product hits the market and it makes an impact on someone's life. For me, that's like the most satisfying thing that can have. We can move the monetary side away, we can move the business side away of it. For me, it's just the fact that I get to work in an industry that's directly helping humanity. For me, that's really what it's all about.
Okay. And what are some of the trends that you're seeing today in the industry, or something that you see coming up in the next 3 or 5 years?
For me, it's software. So I started my career within traditional devices, pacemakers, defibrillators, stents, etc. is what people think our traditional medical devices are. And over the past couple of years, I've been getting into software, and it feels as though that's where the industry is moving. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. That seems to be where the industry is moving. And I was actually in the US last week, and I went to RSNA, which is a radiology event, and there was a special section there just for artificial intelligence. So I think for the young people out there who are looking to get into medical devices and thinking, which area should I work on, it's definitely artificial intelligence and machine learning. That seems to be where the future is in medical devices.
Yeah, artificial intelligence is not just shaking the life science industry, it's shaking a bunch of other industries. And, there's one side of the spectrum where people think that it's going to take over the world, and there's other side where, it's not. Yes, it's great, but it's never going to replace critical thinking or creative thinking that a human being brings to the table. So yeah, it's really fascinating, not just in life sciences, but all industries are seeing AI and machine learning do things much better. The next question I want to ask you is talking about content creation. So the first one, might sound a silly question, but I follow your content, so I have to ask you this for selfish reasons. Where do you shoot your videos? Because you're always like, your background is the perfect landscape. Is that a real background? Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate that I live in the British countryside and my mother is an avid gardener. So my mother is spending like her full-time job is just the back garden. So all the beautiful flowers, the trees that you see is all my mother's work. So I
Wow.
love to shoot in my back garden. And I have to be very tactical about it because I live in the UK and the UK, as everyone knows, is not always the best weather. So I'm always looking at the forecast when the wind is very low, and that's usually the time that I try to shoot. So there's only a few times in the year when I can shoot, but that is actually my back garden that I'm shooting, and it's 100% real.
Wow, amazing. And so it's how far is it from like the big cities? What's the closest big city to you?
So Birmingham is the second biggest city in the UK, and I'm about half an hour away from there. So I'm
Okay.
not very far from the big cities. And as you know,
Okay.
like it's not like the US with the UK, like we could probably travel the whole distance of the UK within 5 to 6 hours. Whereas like,
Yeah.
in the US, 5 to 6 hours is probably traveling one city to the other.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it was just something that struck out to me and I was like, is this a virtual background? Is this a real background? I'm definitely going to ask you that. So thank you. And again, your mom, whatever she's doing with her gardening, it's pretty evident on the screen. It's just spectacular. So look forward to seeing more videos from your backyard. And the next one I want to ask you is you're creating obviously a lot of content in different formats. So you create videos, you create text content or slides or whatnot. How do you go about planning? Like how do you go about deciding what you're going to create in the next 30 or 60 days?
The real answer is completely random. Now, if you go through my content and you would think that I've got it very planned, but reality is it's mostly spur of the moment. The moment I come across something interesting or there's maybe an idea, because I love writing. And we go back on the topic of my mother. My mother used to be a writer back in India. So I've got this habit from her. So like every time I have an idea, I will always write something down. And most of my posts is always spur of the moment. The moment I come across something interesting or there's something I want to share, I do it then and there. And if you go through my post, it may seem like that it's very organized. But reality, that's not the case. It's the moment I come across something interesting and feel as though I need to share it with people, it's more spur of the moment. So yeah, in terms of where I'm into posting every 30 days or 60 days, there is no real schedule. It's the moment I get an idea and I find something interesting, maybe it's an article, maybe there's something that I found throughout my work, I share it immediately. And that's the case with me.
So you are currently doing consulting under QRA Medical, which is your company. So how did you get into starting that? Because I think you started that about 4 years ago, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's
5.
correct. So it was around 2018. I started the company. Is I used to work full time, and I really don't recommend this for everyone. I used to work full time, and I did part time consulting. The reason I did that, I wasn't 100% sure whether I wanted to go into consulting because consulting is completely different to full time work. There's no pension schemes, there's no backup plans. You got to find your own clients, etc. Admin work, finance, accounting, etc. So around 2018, I used to work full time and I would do part-time consulting. And then around 2020, as the consulting rate started working up, it was at the point where I was working 70 to 80 hour weeks. And it was that point that I decided that I'm going to go into full-time consulting. So I really don't recommend this for everyone, but if you are not 100% sure that you want to go into consulting, keep your full-time job. Don't give that up. Try consulting part-time, maybe just a few hours a week to give a bit of a taster. And if you decide that you enjoy consulting, then you can decide that you want to go full-time into it. I really don't recommend leaving your full-time job, jumping into consulting and deciding that, okay, it's not for you, and then going back. What I really recommend is keep your full-time job and then maybe do something part-time and then work out if it's the best decision for you or not.
Yeah, that's great advice. I can resonate with that because I was doing something similar in my career as well. So talking about consulting, I talk to a lot of consultants and a lot of even clients who are hiring consultants. Majority of them have a bad have a bad rep about consultants because of multiple reasons, whether it's quality of work or timelines. From your experience, if you had, let's say you had all the power to define how consulting should work, what would you change? Like, what is something that you feel consulting should become in the next whatever time frame?
Consulting is all about customer service. You really need to go above and beyond. And number two, when it comes to consulting, is that you need to deliver much more than you think you need to. As a consultant, I explain to people that I'm sitting there, I'm sometimes working all the way up to midnight. Some days I'm up at 4 a.m. in the morning if I'm working with a US client. And I think that's the key when you're a consultant. It's not like a regular 9 to 5 job, where it's 5 o'clock you finish and you shut the computer off and you walk away. When you're a consultant and my phone beeps, I get an email or something like that, you have to answer that immediately. And that's what comes with the consulting. And that's kind of what the downside of consulting is. You have to be immediately available at every given time. And I feel as though the bad consultants out there are not doing that. They're treating it as like a regular 9 to 5 job. But the whole purpose of consulting is you're basically someone who needs to be available 24/7. That's really what consulting is.
And are you doing consulting solo, or do you have a team of consultants that are helping your clients?
So I'm majority doing it solo. So I've got 3 different systems that I use. Number one is I work with job search or recruitment agencies, and they say, okay, Karandeep, you're going to work 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, etc. with this week with this particular client. Then I also work with other consultancies. So these are other consultancies that use multiple consultants. So I get to work directly with them. And then number 3, I've got clients that I found directly, and then sometimes I outsource work, but 80% of the time it is basically just me.
And I'm assuming that just like every other consultant, you travel a lot, right? Whether it's for audits or clients. Do you like traveling as a consultant, or how do you manage doing your personal, like if you're going to a new place where a client is, how do you manage your time with the client versus any sightseeing or that other stuff?
So with me, I generally travel once a month, and especially, we had COVID, which obviously put a bit of something like to our travels. But recently I've been going to the US quite a lot. I was in Detroit 6 weeks ago. I was in Detroit again 3 weeks ago. I was in Chicago last week. And for me, I've got a bit of a fascination. I've always wanted to travel the US, and I've always tried to use my work as an excuse to do that. Again, as a consultant, it's a pick and choose. If you want to travel, it's up to you. I can potentially travel every other week to different parts of the EU, different parts of the US. But as a consultant, I've always got the privilege of being able to choose how much I want to travel. But yeah, in terms of sightseeing, it's kind of like when you're traveling for work, there's not much you can do. So for example, I was in Chicago the other week. You don't really get to see much of the city. It's like you go there, you do your work during the day, and then the evening they may take you out for a meal. You might get about an hour or so of sightseeing. So as a consultant, when you travel for work, it's not the same if you go for personal travel, but it's still a nice way to do it. So it really comes down to how much time you have as a consultant. I'm still fairly young. I'm not married. I don't have a family, so I don't mind traveling. But if you're somebody else that does have a family, does have commitments, maybe you won't be able to travel as much as I can. Well, my limit is usually once a month, and that works out well for me.
Yeah, I can relate because I do have family. So, I have some responsibilities with that. And I had to cut back my traveling just because of that reason, because it wasn't feasible to go out, especially if my wife had to pick him up from daycare or all that stuff. So yeah, definitely my traveling has reduced quite a bit since having a child. One thing that I noticed in the last month or so watching your content is that you were selected by LinkedIn, or you applied to the LinkedIn content creation program. Do you want to talk about a little bit about how that happened and how is it going? Is it done, or is it still going on?
Yeah, I've just completed it this week. So the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program, it was 6 weeks long, and I actually applied to it. So how I found it, I don't know. I was on LinkedIn one day and somebody made a post that there was this Creator Accelerator program. I put it through and then I forgot about it. And 3 weeks later, I'm selected. Just like many things happen in your life. Sometimes you just apply and then before you forget about it, you move on, you keep going with your work, and then all of a sudden I'm applied. Now, there was a financial incentive about it, but the beauty of the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program is just the amount of creators on LinkedIn. I couldn't believe it. It was just absolutely amazing. The different industries and the different topics that people were talking about, it completely opened my eyes on what they were. And number 2, of course, was the community. I got to meet another 150 set of accelerators, all based in the UK, basically, another 150 creators. And it was just the supportive, the community, what it was like. And it's effectively, I've now got another 150 people who also create on LinkedIn that I can reach out to any time. So the program's now over. Now, sadly, I was in Chicago at the time, like I mentioned. They actually had a meetup in London. where they actually had the finale of it, where all the creators got to meet each other. Now, I couldn't make it, but I got to meet so many other creators, get ideas, support. I also got to get access to beta tools on LinkedIn. And what's happening with LinkedIn is like, Instagram, TikTok and all that, where they're basically always like incentivizing creators, etc. LinkedIn is still at the early days. And I was very glad at the point there where LinkedIn is now recognizing that there are a bunch of creators out there and they're actually going to support them with tools. And LinkedIn themselves are reaching out to say, hey, you guys are creators. Let us know what you think of our tools. And I got early access to video carousels, scheduling on LinkedIn. A lot of people have always moaned on LinkedIn that they can't schedule a post. As someone as part of that Creator Accelerator, I now get to schedule a post. Whereas before I would, for example, if I wanted to post at 10 a.m. in the UK on a Monday, I would have to go on LinkedIn and post at 10 a.m. on a Monday. I can now on a Saturday evening finish my post, pre-schedule it for a Monday at 10 a.m. and it's done.
That's a great feature because I've had to use other tools for scheduling purposes, but that's great. So you're getting access to some of these tools and obviously being part of a community and learning from other creators. I haven't seen many creators in life sciences space. There's not that many. Like I know you, I've been following your stuff and I know a few others, but most of the people that I see consistently putting out content are either in tech or sales or marketing or these fields that are generally out there. So it's great that, you are creating content, you are in the life sciences industry. For me, you are someone that I can learn a lot from, learning different types of ways you're creating. And plus now being in the LinkedIn program, I'm sure that you're going to apply a lot of the stuff that you learned. So I have to watch your content pretty closely for the next 6 months or a year to see how you're doing. So this is something you may or may not remember. When was the first time you decided I'm going to start posting content on LinkedIn, whether it's once a day or 3 times a week or whatever? When was that moment where you're like, I'm all in, I'm doing this?
It was 2018, the time I started my consultancy. This is one called Munir Ranazi, who runs a podcast called Easy Medical Device. And he was the only guy teaching in medical devices. And it was also around the time that I always used to get young students saying to me, look, because I was one of the rare people that went straight into quality and regulatory affairs. Usually people that are in the quality and regulatory fall in the industry, they work as an engineer for 5 years, or maybe they work in sales or marketing and they fall into it. I was one of the rare few that went straight into it at a university. I studied pharmaceuticals, but just somehow I ended up getting in medical devices. And I was working with quality and regulatory from day one. And I contacted him and said, look, I get this question quite a lot. I'm pretty sure there's other people out there. Let's do a podcast where I teach people how to get into quality and regulatory affairs. And it trickled on from there. I did a podcast with him. And then before I knew, I was making videos about how to get in quality and regulatory. And even to this day, I still do that. So it was around 2018 where the idea came to me, that maybe there's other young people like me who want to get into quality and regulatory, but maybe don't know how to go about doing it. And I felt as though I need to share that knowledge because I was in exactly the same position. I wanted to get into quality and regulatory, but there's no one online talking about how to do it. So I felt as though I should be the person to do that.
And the good thing about the way you write content, and this is anybody that's following you will know this, or your future followers who don't know you and might connect with you after this show, is the way you simplify the quality and regulatory language, right? Because it's not an easy language to understand. Even as consultants, when a new regulation or guidance document comes out, we have to understand, what does this word really mean? Like, what is the interpretation behind that word? But when you're writing content, you start out clearly with a question or a statement, and the way you break it down, it's really something amazing that I've learned a lot just by reading your post. And it's like, wow, this is a very complex topic, but now I understand because it's so simplified and broken down. So it's great that you're doing that for the young people who are just starting out their career. And also, it's not only for them, it's also for people who've been in the industry to learn a lot from that. So
I completely agree with you. It's like, I can show this content to my grandmother and she would understand 50% what I'm saying. And that immediately for me, it's a form of validation to say that I've simplified something that people outside the industry can actually understand what I'm doing. Because a lot of the time, my parents always ask me, like, Karandeep, what exactly do you do? I'm like, Mom, Dad, like, just go on my LinkedIn, go onto YouTube. watch my videos, and that's your answer.
Yeah, and that's the way to do it, right? What advice do you have for youngsters coming into the industry, whether it's about creating their personal brand on LinkedIn or just in general, the mindset they need to have if they're starting out their careers, at least for the first 1 to 3 years? What should they do?
Remove your limiting beliefs. I've come across so many young people out the industry saying, oh, I've just come out of university. I will never be a manager. I will never be this. Immediately, you're setting yourself up for failure. Just remove that negative connotation immediately. So what I say to them is, even if you're not confident in terms of making your own content on LinkedIn, another form of engagement on LinkedIn is engaging with other people's posts. So even if you don't want to make your own videos or you don't want to make your own content, you can start engaging with other people's posts. You don't even have to make video content. You can start making posts. You can start making images. And LinkedIn is a beautiful tool for that. And I've often said to students, when people say, look, Karandeep, I've finished XYZ degree. I don't know what to do. I say, you know what? Go onto LinkedIn, find people who have done similar degrees and see what they're doing 2 years from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And don't be afraid to contact people. And the fact is, I've had students message me and say, oh, Karandeep, I'm sorry if I'm offending you, if I've contacted you. I'm like, guys, don't be offended. I'm happy to help you. There's so many great people out there in the life science industry that if you reach out to them for help, they will happily help you. And if you reach out to somebody, what's the absolute worst they can do? Just ignore you? Are you any worse off? So that's what I'm going to say to the young people out there. Go out there and contact people you think that can help you. And the absolute worst they can do is ignore you. Are you any worse off? No. And if you keep contacting people, eventually you're going to come across someone who's willing to help you. Because that's what the life science industry is about. You know, there's a lot of helpful people out there. And if you keep contacting, eventually you're going to find a mentor or somebody out there who's willing to help you. So yeah, go out there and contact people. That's what I'm going to say. Don't be afraid of doing that.
You talked about removing the limiting beliefs or trying to think positive. So one question that just came to my mind as I was listening to you is, what is one piece of advice that you got early in your career that you're thankful that you ignored, right? Because when you're starting out, whether it's your manager or your peers, they're always telling you, oh, you should do this, or, oh, if I were you, I would do this. But there's a lot of good and bad advice. And it's sometimes early in your career, it can be hard to differentiate what's going to be helpful for you. Do you think of any advice that you got that you're thankful you ignored and chose to do something else?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There were certain people that said to me, you need X amount of years experience to get in a managerial role or become a consultant. And I think it's absolute rubbish. The amount of years you have in the industry, of course, is important. But really, what exact experience do you have? There's people out there with 10 plus years experience, but it's only like towards, let's say, post-market surveillance. They haven't had the whole experience in terms of quality and regulatory. So my biggest advice that I give to people is don't limit yourself by the amount of years that you've had in the industry, but instead look at the actual experience that you've had in terms of scope. That's what's most important. So I was in a job once, and I'm not going to mention, I'm not bashing the company or anything like that, where I was told I had to wait an extra couple of years. I ignored that advice and I moved into another role, and it worked out well for me. That's what I say is kind of, don't look at the amount of years you have in the industry, but look at the actual work that you're doing in the industry. That's more important.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've gotten similar advice thinking about a linear mindset where if you have X number of years, it means your quality of work is Y%, but that really doesn't line up, especially, with technology and all the tools we have at our disposal today. It is important, but I agree with you. It shouldn't be the measuring stick of any person's skill or ability. So listen, thank you, man. This has been really, really amazing. I do have one final question for you before we wrap up. Any big goals for 2023, personal, professional, whatever it may be?
I'm going to switch up the content even more. I've known, and I'd openly admit this, I've been way lazy with it. It may sound ridiculous as a guy who posts on LinkedIn like nearly every day and runs a podcast, etc. But I've not been very consistent with it. I really want to help some people get into the industry. I get messages every day saying, Karandeep, I watched one of your videos and I passed my job interview. I was able to answer questions in the job interview. For me, that's a sense of satisfaction that there's a lot of people getting into life science, a lot of people getting into medical devices, because it's one of those industries that impacts humanity for the best. So I'm going to be switching up my content a lot more. And I'm going to say to these listeners, if I don't do that, hold me accountable.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. So where can people find you after this episode? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure, the best way is LinkedIn. That's mainly where I'm nearly every day, and that's how you and me connected as well. So, if you've got any questions or anything like that, reach out to me via LinkedIn. If you want to learn about medical devices, how to get a career, what quality and regulatory affairs is all about, LinkedIn is the best choice. If you want to learn about the MedTech industry as a whole, you can follow my podcast, which is called the MedTech Podcast. But yeah, LinkedIn is where you're going to get the best answers out of me.
Thanks again. It was fun. I hope the listeners are going to get a lot of stuff out of this. Great conversation, and wish you all the best for everything that's going to come in 2023. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you very much.